The Tudor History and Travel Show is a podcast that brings Tudor history to life by exploring Tudor places and artefacts in the flesh. You will be travelling through time with Sarah Morris, the Tudor travel guide, uncovering the stories behind some of the most amazing Tudor locations and objects in the UK. Because when you visit a Tudor building, it is only time and not space which separates you from the past. And now over to your host, Sarah Morris.
Hello, my friends, wherever you are in the four corners of planet Earth. It's a huge Happy New Year to you from me, Sarah, the Tudor Travel Guide. Well, you join me for another year of the Tudor History and Travel Show. And I assure you that over the last couple of months, I've been working quite hard to pull together this year's agenda, and we have some fabulous places already saying yes and lined up and in the diary ready to go. And I am looking forward to bringing you another year of incredible Tudor stories from around the United Kingdom. Before we get on to today's episode, I just want to remind you that if you are interested in an in-person tour, that's touring in person with me and also my co-host of Simply Tudor Tours, Adam Pennington, along with a plethora of expert guides and speakers, then do pop over to simplytudortours.com, where you can see all our current tours, and we still have availability for our Rise and Fall of Anne Boleyn tour in September of this year. If you are thinking, I just love to go and visit the UK, I just love to tour some of the sites associated with Anne, see them for myself in person, then please think about joining us, because last year we had a truly epic time. And if you pop over to the site, you can read details of the tour. You can also read what some of our lovely guests had to say about their experiences with us in 2024. So that's simplytudortours.com. And if you are interested, perhaps not this year, but for future tours, of course, while you're there, make sure you subscribe to our mailing list and you will be among the first to hear about future events. Well, with that, I can get on with introducing today's episode. In this episode, I travelled to the Midlands once more, to Leicestershire. In fact, it's a two-site podcast on this occasion, but both with connections to the mighty and powerful Grey family. I suspect most people would agree that the family came to prominence first of all through the marriage of Elizabeth Woodville to her first husband, Sir John Grey. Of course, their offspring was Thomas and Richard, with Thomas becoming the first Marquess of Dorset and thus becoming an extremely important courtier during the late medieval, and, of course, later on, the family were important during the Tudor period, notably, of course, because of Lady Jane Grey, who ultimately became the 9 Days Queen. Now, the family based themselves just outside of Leicester. There were two properties that are of particular note and which I visit during this podcast. The first is Groby Old Hall, which was the early medieval house of the Grey family, and the one certainly that Elizabeth Woodville would have known as a bride. Then later, the family built the prestigious Bradgate house in Bradgate Park, the ruins of which you can still see today. Now, there's an awful lot of controversy around that particular house and the ruins that survive. Were they the ruins of the house that Lady Jane Grey grew up in? Well, there has been recently a 5-year archaeological dig undertaken by the University of Leicester to investigate the true origins of the house. And in fact, if you've been following me for a long time, you may remember that very early on in the history of the Tudor History and Travel Show, I visited Bradgate Park when the archaeological dig was in, I think, its second year, and I did a short interview with one of the members of staff. Now, the dig is now complete, and I have for a while wanted to go back and complete the story. And I was very fortunate to be invited by Peter Liddle, who was part of the team, not only to go and visit Bradgate House and hear about the final conclusions of that archaeological dig, but also a chance to visit Groby Old Hall, which still survives, although, of course, it has been much altered over time, and we were welcomed in as a guest of its owner. And that, my friends, is the focus of our podcast today. The history of the Greys of Groby and later of Bradgate, and the two main properties which they used as part of their property portfolio. So, as you've just heard, I join our expert guide today on site, first of all at Groby Old Hall. Peter Liddle is going to talk to us about the history of the hall before we move location just a mile or so down the road, a couple of miles down the road to Bradgate Park, and pick up the story of the later house. And finally, I will be able to share with you the conclusions of the team. Was Bradgate House the house that Jane Grey grew up in? Well, let's find out. Hello, dear listeners, and welcome to another episode of the Tudor History and Travel Show. Well, you find me on a very quite icy, chilly morning. I'm wrapped up with all my woolies today because I'm going to be outdoors, and I've come all the way to Leicestershire to explore actually two sites today. One of which I have never been to before and intrigues me greatly because we are going back in time to the end of the 15th century. And then for the second half of this recording, we'll be moving on to talk about a very famous property that became of age in the 16th century. So today I am starting our investigation in the village of Groby in Leicestershire, and I have come to the Old Hall, which has a very noble history associated with a very famous figure from late medieval history, of course, Elizabeth Woodville, who married into the Grey family. And we will be talking about the history of the family, the history of the manor house here at Groby, before, later today, we hop on over down the road to Bradgate Park, where the Grey family built a fine Tudor manor house, which of course was the birthplace and the childhood home of Lady Jane Grey. Now, standing next to me right now is our expert today, who is going, So maybe that statement that I have just made may come under some scrutiny later on today. But without further ado, let me introduce our guest expert, Peter Liddle. Hello, welcome to the show.
And hello, Sarah. It's always nice to be at Groby Old Hall. It's a fabulous site that takes us back way beyond the Tudor period to a Norman castle, which we're standing next to the castle mound of, and then all the way through, well, to the present day with, sort of major buildings here.
Well, a couple of things to say first before we kick off. First of all, people may hear some noise in the background because we are quite close to quite a main road here, just not too far from Leicester. Groby is a village. How many miles outside of Leicester? A couple of miles, 2-3 miles outside of the city centre?
Well, 4 or 5 from the centre,
4
I think.
or 5 from the centre, okay. Yeah. But yes, you're quite right. I mean, Groby Old Hall, a fascinating history. Somewhere, of course, it's in private ownership today, so I've not visited here before. So I am fascinated to hear more about the story of the hall and, of course, the Grey family who built both the castle originally and, of course, the later houses. But Peter, perhaps you could just remind us of what's your interest in history and buildings?
Well, I've been involved in local archaeology for over 50 years now, working mostly for the Leicestershire Museum Service, where I was Leicestershire County Council senior archaeologist. So, and when Time Team rang up, as they did every year, set about looking for sites, I suggested Groby Old Hall, and Time Team came and did work here which had really moved our understanding of the site on considerably. 3 days, but 3 very useful days.
That's fantastic. And of course you've been on the show before, haven't you? We've met and spoken before, not that long ago in fact, at Collie Weston.
That's true, yes.
Where you were helping me decipher a crucial piece of evidence of a roof tile. So yes, it's not your first rodeo here.
And Lawn Abbey, of course.
Of course, Lawn Abbey, of course.
The Cromwells, yes.
Yes, well, I've got a real affection for Cromwell. In fact, doing a lot of writing about him at the moment. So I've been looking again at Lawn Abbey, but that is another story.
Yes.
Okay, right. Well, today our aim is to tell the history of... it's a chronology that spans how many years from the inception of the castle here through to Bradgate Park?
Well, we don't know when the castle was built. There's no documentary evidence, so it's going to be late 11th or 12th century through then to, well, the Greys were living at Bradgate until the middle of the 18th century. Right. And of course owned it well into the 20th century. So, there's a long timeline here. A long
timeline here. And I asked you to bring us to the beginning of that chronology, which is the back garden to the current house, and we have lots of earthworks. So maybe we could start right back at the beginning and that castle that you mentioned.
Right. Well, as you say, we're standing in just behind the Great Hall, and in front of us is a great big mound, and that is a motte. Oh yeah, as in Motte and Bailey Castle.
Can you just explain for people who maybe coming to this for the first time and don't know the terminology?
Yes.
What a castle, there were some regular spaces and features. Can you just explain that?
Generally, a late 11th, 12th century castle had a motte, which was a big earthen mound, which would often have a wooden tower on the top of it, which was the sort of place of last resort should you be attacked by somebody, a good lookout point. And then the bailey, which ran away from that, was where all the domestic buildings were. The castle hall, castle chapel, everything else you needed, really, the kitchens and everything else. So we know where the motte is because you can't miss it. It's a great earthen mound. The bailey we don't quite understand. There are ditches, but they don't quite join up properly with them. The mound. We would quite like to come back and do some more geophysical survey, and because your big bailey ditches ought to show up really clearly. Right. Maybe we'll get round to doing that. Of course, what we would need is a licence from Historic England because this is a scheduled ancient monument. So it's a matter of going through the bureaucracy to get that, and of course the permission of the owner, but who is very friendly.
Yes, indeed. So who built it?
Well,
and why here?
Groby was part of what's called the Honour of Leicester, which is the estate belonging to the Earls of Leicester. So at Domesday Book, that big estate was owned by a man called Hugh de Grompmanel, and he then sort of fades from the scene, and the Beaumonts then take over the estate and become Earls of Leicester. So it may be Hugh who builds it, it may be one of the Beaumonts, and certainly by the 12th century there was a castle here. This was one of the subdivisions of the big estate. So this is where manorial courts and all those things would have been held in that period. But I have a suspicion that that this was as much a hunting lodge, almost, in the form of a castle as something military.
What makes you think that?
Well, we are on the edge of Charnwood Forest. Over here is one of the big hunting areas of Leicestershire, half of which belong to the Earls of Leicester, half of which belong to the Earls of Chester. There is a castle here, and then there's a castle at Whitwick, which is on the other side of Charnwood Forest. And I suspect, when you look at where the castles are in Leicestershire, they are very often next to hunting preserves.
I see.
And of course, one of the major recreations of the aristocracy was hunting. So, why not put places where you can actually stay over for a day or two hunting here?
So this might be a stupid question. Was their main residence of the Earls of Leicester Castle?
Yes, it was.
So that was the administrative centre.
Huge distance away, of course. The end of a day's hunting, another 5 miles back. You think, well, let's build a castle here.
So we're taking a walk uphill. We've got the mound up there on our right-hand side. Is there anything else we need to know about the castle or the early history?
Well, one thing that Time Team actually demonstrated beyond doubt is that there was a stone tower in the motte there, which they were able to excavate, and found the steps leading down to a door at the bottom, which you always have. Really hope you have that Tutankhamun moment.
Yeah, there was
nothing. Yeah, it's filled up with clay.
Oh,
so
how sad.
Yeah, but clearly there was a little basement in the tower there. But whether it was filled up with clay just to make it a bit more stable, I'm not sure.
So the castle endured for how many years before?
Well, we don't quite know, but by the certainly by the 14th century, this was a very major manor house of the Ferrers family. Now, it came from the Beaumont Earls of Leicester by failure of the male line, and then daughters marrying other people, and it's quite complicated. But a descendant of the Beaumont marries a younger son of the Earls of Derby Ferrers to produce the
Ferrers
of Groby.
And I think that's what most sort of Tudor history lovers will know. That name starts now to become familiar.
Yeah. And so in the 14th century, we have some documents that tell us that this was a very major manor house at that point. We've got an assignment of dower of Margaret Ferrers, and the number of rooms that she gets as half the manor house of Groby in her dower settlement suggests that this was really a big complex at that point in the late 14th century.
So was the castle simply abandoned and a new medieval house built, or do we not really know?
We don't know. That is the long and short of it. I mean, I suspect that we are standing in the bailey of the castle, and that morphs into the manor house of the Ferrers, and then into that of the Greys. But really, with 3 days of excavation, which is all that's ever happened here, you don't get an awful lot, and certainly you don't get the time depth. You see the last phases of activity, really.
So the Ferrers family, barons, what do we know of them and their origin, and how important were they as part of the court of the period?
Well, I'm not sure how important they were on a national basis, but certainly in Leicestershire they were one of the biggest landowning families here. So they were Baron Ferrers of Groby, the estate was a big one. So so this was quite a major place locally. But I'm not, as I say, on the national level, I've never really traced them, so I don't know.
And we've come up to a sort of I can see a really flat, large area with some interesting stones.
Yes. Well,
is this part of where the manor house would have been?
We are just outside, as far as we can tell, the main bit of the Ferrers Manor House, which then passed by marriage again to the Gray family. So the walls behind us here, behind the brambles.
Yeah, I'd almost missed those, yes.
They are part of the chapel of the manor house, which we really almost missed this completely. But a tiny little excavation when Time Team were here showed that, under those Chalmer Forest stone walls, there is a sandstone chamfered plinth underneath, which suggests 13th century build. And almost certainly these walls would have been rendered in medieval, so you wouldn't have seen the stone. But of course it's been built and rebuilt and knocked about something rotten since this fell into disrepair. But we from the earliest plan of Groby that we have from the 18th century, you can see a big roofless cruciform building, cross-shaped building that doesn't half look like a church, and it's there.
So that's an 18th century drawing of the...
Yes, but if we go back to those documents in the 14th century, they're already calling it the Old Chapel. Right. So it's quite possible that that a chapel on this site was the chapel of the castle.
The castle in the Bailey.
Yes, absolutely.
And it just got repurposed for the manor house.
And
that makes a lot of sense.
We again, another thing that I would love to do is to record what we've got here properly, because we really haven't, and just work out how much of this is really medieval and how much is later rebuilding and things.
Sure. What do we actually know of the appearance of the manor house? Anything? You talked about the chapel there. What else do we have?
Well, we know the plan of it from the Time Team work.
Let's have a look, because you're bringing out now the sort of geophys. Is that right?
This is ground penetrating radar.
Right.
So we are standing about here. So the motte, you just see
is in front of
very
us.
Dimly the contours on there of the motte.
Yes.
And this little box here was just there.
Just behind us is the church.
Yeah, so that is the church in here. And then you can see the walls of the private rooms of the Ferrers family. Okay, so running through here.
So stretching away in front of me now with the motte on my right and the church on my left. I'm really standing in the middle of the privy range of the manor house,
very close to the edge of it. I think we would just be standing in a wall, probably, more or less.
Okay.
And coming from that, to tiny little excavations, you can see the little boxes on the plan there. We got very nice window tracery, suggesting smart windows. We got slate roofs. We got the ridge tiles on the top, which give us a date. Because of course slates are not easy to date, but the tiles on the top are they are 13th, 14th century. Wonderful. So this is definitely Ferrers build.
And now might be time just for me to remind everybody who is tuning in today that as ever we have a show notes page, and Peter has kindly allowed us to reproduce some of these images. So if you want to check those out, please do so as we continue our conversation.
Yes. So shall we walk?
Let's do. Yeah. So we are walking, the privy range is in front of us, but over to the left it opens out into an open field. Lots of some snow on the grass today. There's some interesting looking remnants over there. Can tell me about where we are. Are we in the courtyard now?
We are just come across that high status range, and of course, as you know, at this period, the posh buildings will be up on the first floor.
Yes, indeed.
So you can never excavate those, which is one of the great frustrations. Yeah. But what we'd be looking across a courtyard. The Great Hall would have been here
on our right-hand side.
Yes. So partly in the area that we're in at the moment, and partly in the burial ground of the church.
Which is adjacent. So just for those people who are tuning in front of us, we're in a sort of a large open space, grassy space. There's a wall that separates us from the church and the churchyard beyond that.
Yeah, and of course, we always think that village churches are going to be very old. And it's not.
It doesn't look very old. No.
I think it's 1842 or something like that. Up until that time, the people of Groby, unless you were a Ferrers or a Grey and had your own private chapel, had to walk to the next village of Bradgate.
I see.
For church.
Okay, right.
So, but when that was built, there is a little reference to them finding medieval walls there that they thought was something kitcheny, sort of. The service end of the Great Hall will be at that end.
Around about where the church is. Yeah, it makes a lot of... So we're in a single courtyard house looking at your plan, is that right? Does it look...
There may be a second courtyard, which it's a bit unclear what happens further over in that direction, but certainly this is a big courtyard with buildings ranged around it. Up here, where another of the time team trenches were, they found a bay window, an oriel window that lit the dais.
Oh, lovely.
Which
lovely.
is just what you want.
What a great find.
Yeah. There was something showing on the geophysics that we weren't quite sure what it was, but what I always refer to as a sticky out bit.
Yes, I think that's a good way of putting it.
We're never quite sure what sticky out bits are, but that turned out to be what we're looking at. And of course, one of the reasons that I was able to get Time Team here, apart from the fact that you mentioned Elizabeth Woodville and suddenly they'd bite, was that we'd had the churchyard wall that you're talking about needed to be rebuilt because it collapsed.
I see.
And because it's a Shedyench monument, there had to be an excavation in advance of that. And they found a wall running this way.
So right where we are now,
yes.
right in front of... We've walked across the other side of the courtyard, really.
Yes.
Yes.
With a tile floor, a medieval tile floor.
How lovely.
Just on the edge there. So, we were fairly certain this was quite a high-status building. We knew it wasn't the chapel.
Yeah.
So Great Hall seemed like a very good suggestion. And then finding the oriel window at the other end where the dais would have been really... clinched it.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Maybe we should talk a little bit while we're walking around, looking at some of the remains. Talk a little bit about how the Grey family took over this site, and of course the advent, how Elizabeth Woodville comes to be associated with the old hall here.
Right. Well. It comes to the Greys because Elizabeth Ferrers, who is the heiress of the Ferrers family, marries a Grey. That's in the middle of the 15th century.
Okay.
Early to middle part of the 15th century. I can't remember the date. But, and then their son, Sir John Grey, marries Elizabeth Woodville. So... who, we know better as the White Queen, of course, but wasn't at that point.
Not because at that point,
she was Dame Elizabeth Grey. So, would have known the buildings that we're looking at. And the fragment that we see here with a doorway, there's a window, the ivy has grown up over it again.
Yes.
So, we are just moving inside.
We're moving
this
inside,
building.
kind of the far range from where we walked into the courtyard.
We're fairly sure this is a service building, so this is a part of the buttery or the pantry or something like that. But, as we go through the door...
I mean, this is the most probably substantial.
This is the only really standing bit, apart from the chapel, of that early manor house.
Just walking underneath an ivy-covered stone archway, so the doorway.
Yes.
Right, so we've come outside, and you were just showing me there's a window.
There's a window here,
oh, yes.
sort of hiding behind
all the ivy.
But you can see we're on the outside, and if we look right down at the bottom down here, you can see there is a sandstone chamfered plinth at the bottom.
Oh yes, so right, you've got to push the grass
Yeah,
away, but you can see that at the bottom of the wall the masonry is different.
So you wouldn't have seen any of this. It would have all been rendered.
Okay.
But as I say, this is the service end of the building. So this is the servants' end.
So do we think that the hall was largely built of stone as opposed to being timber framed, for example?
Yes, I mean, one thing you're not short of in Groby is stone.
And you've got the castle, I suppose, to potentially dismantle as well and use that building material.
Yes, a lot of that, and certainly in the early days, will have been timber. But Charnwood Forest stone, and this is very local stone.
Right.
And the slates are probably Groby slates, because there are slate quarries just over there, which would have belonged to the family, of course.
Yes.
So you have all the materials you need. Where the sandstone is coming from is, which is used for the detailing.
Yeah.
That I'm not sure, but that they may have had to buy that, which must have hurt.
Right. Cost some money.
Yeah. So one of the things that we do know is that when John Leyland visited here in the early 1540s, probably, he talks about the great brick gatehouse that they're building, but he does say that the older buildings were built by the Ferrers family. Right. So these buildings are probably still standing into the 16th century.
Right. That's quite handy, isn't it, to know that good old John Leyland comes through again.
Yes, he was here and he was at Bradgate, which is really useful because he gives us a little clues when he...
He just drops those little gems in, doesn't he?
Yes, he does.
Anybody who listens to me on a regular basis reads my blogs will know how much I love John Leyland.
He got about, didn't he, John Leyland?
He did. I kind of feel like a modern 21st century version of John Leyland wandering around the countryside, capturing bits of Tudor history as they still stand today. But can we just go back? We've got Elizabeth now married into the family.
Yes.
And she has two sons?
Yes.
By her husband?
Richard and Thomas. Thomas the elder, Richard the younger. And then John Grey gets himself killed at the Second Battle of St Albans in 1461, which, of course, fighting for the House of Lancaster, which, of course, are the losing side of that phase of the Wars of the Roses, which means that when you are killed in battle and you're on the losing side, you're a traitor. If you're on the winning side, you're a hero.
Of course.
But if you're a traitor, your lands are seized by the crown. So the estates are taken by Edward IV, who is the victor, which then leaves them in some trouble.
Because the family's destitute, really, at that point.
So she goes back to her parents at Grafton, I think, in Northamptonshire. Yes, that's the one. And hearing that Edward was hunting, this is the story, I don't know whether it's true or not.
Great story.
Hearing, hunting in the forest nearby, she goes to appeal to him. And as they say, she appealed to him so much that he married her.
And anybody who's seen The White Queen will know that scene very, very well. So
then, of course, that ups the status of the family from local, important local landowners in Leicestershire, barons. I mean, they're not low status to start with, but they become earls of Huntingdon, then Marquis of Dorset. So they sort of... They're
climbing the social ladder, because baron is the first level of the nobility, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
I'm trying to remember all of them. Baron, I can't remember whether it's Earl next, then Marquis, then Duke, Viscount.
Yeah.
Our soundman has come in and saved the day. Baron, I knew I brought him for some reason. Baron, Viscount, Earl.
Yeah.
Marquis,
they jump
Duke.
to Earl and then to Marquis very quickly. So they become Earls of Huntingdon, but then they give that back and become Marquis of Dorset. So
perfect. So they shot up.
Yeah. Now, of course, then they are the stepsons of the king. So, they are very close to the throne, and that brings the family into that royal circle. There is then a bit of a hiccup when Edward dies, of course, because they were very much associated with the Woodvilles, who were no friends of Richard III. So when he takes the throne, Earl Rivers, head of the Woodville family, is executed, and Richard Grey is executed as well, which leaves Thomas. There is a rapprochement, with Richard III to an extent, but then he flees off to, rapprochement by Elizabeth and Richard, but by this time Thomas has fled to France to join the Earl of Richmond. Henry Tudor. But then hearing of that Elizabeth is sort of made up with Richard III, he decides to come back. So he's in bad odour with everybody, basically, because he is then captured before he gets back to England, and so he's just, he's not regarded as being a reliable friend of either side. So whoever won the Battle of Bosworth would have been in trouble, I think.
Oh yeah, tricky. Yes, I did read he was a sort of a reluctant Lancastrian. He was never really fully trusted by Henry VII once he'd taken the throne.
I believe he did do a bit of jousting, which always got him on side with the Tudors. But they managed to sort of ride this. And Leyland tells us that he builds this great brick gatehouse at the front of the manor house, with the old manor house behind. Shall we go and see?
Yeah, let's walk along. We've come through a gate in a wall. We're in a totally different space now. We've got a later house here, but we've got some you've got to explain this to me, because it's a right old hodgepodge of a building, isn't it, in terms of different styles?
Can I just read you what our friend Leyland has to say about this, if I can find it? The older part of the work, which is at Groby, was made by the Ferrers, but newer works and buildings were erected by the Lord Thomas, the first Marquess of Dorset, among which works he erected the foundation and walls of a great gatehouse of brick, and a tower, but that was left half finished of him, and so it standeth yet. Ooh. This Lord Thomas erected also an almost finished 2 towers of brick in front of the house, as respondent on each side to the gatehouse. Now, I don't understand that. I don't know if you do. But it does show that that somewhere at the front of the building, they were building in brick.
Yes.
And we have in front of us a big brick tower.
We do.
So one way or another, I am fairly certain that is the work of the Marquess of Dorset in the late 15th century. So he dies in 1501, 1502, that sort of time. So that gives us. If we believe Leyland, and I think he's generally a very reliable witness, this is one of the earliest brick buildings in Leicestershire.
So a gatehouse normally has 2 towers.
Yes.
Does this suggest that the surviving tower had a twin?
Well,
And that
yeah.
in the middle there...
Well, there's a brick tower here. There's a brick tower there. But as you can see on the side of this tower here, it's running on in the direction towards us.
Yes.
There's a door. There's a door further up.
Yes.
So there are several stories of build here. There's a fireplace in there. You know, it's been refaced in stone further down, so we can't quite see what's going on there. But to my mind, that could be, running over the gate here. So, there could be another tower here.
I see.
So what we could have is the two towers in front of the gate here. And then this is the other buildings that he built in front of the old manor house there.
I see.
But the alternative view is that tower, which we'll see much better from the other side, and that tower and the entrances between the two.
Yeah.
So
it could be, we could have one of two directions,
Yes.
basically, and we're not sure
Yeah.
which way the gate and the entrance was actually oriented.
Absolutely,
I
that
see.
is quite right. And you can see that the present Groby Old Hall is partly brick. It's partly stone. It's when you get up into the lofts, there are smoke-blackened timbers up there, suggesting an open hearth there. But it's too high up in the building somehow. It doesn't quite work.
Right.
So whether they have been repositioned from the old Great Hall there into this, it's all
recycling.
And I suspect a lot of this is recycling. You can see there's a lot of ashlar stone in here, squared blocks of sandstone. But if you look at the brick, the sandstone is over the brick. So, from a stratigraphical point of view, as archaeologists, we look at this as to what comes before what. The brick's older than the stone. I've learnt from Bradgate, to recognise Tudor bricklaying when you see it. It's English bond is the way they laid it. So
What does that mean?
It means that they laid bricks so that you saw the ends in one row, then the next row you saw the sides. So headers and stretchers, they call it. And they are alternate. That's the way that a Tudor bricklayer laid his bricks, which is really helpful at Bradgate, as we'll see later on.
Well, you show that, you can point that out to us at
Well, I
Bradgate.
can point out here,
okay.
but there we can see where they have reconstructed some of the buildings. You can see where the joints are.
I see.
Because in the 30s, when they did the reconstruction, because they'd all learnt to lay bricks in a modern fashion, so you can see the difference. So. And further over there, we've got the other end here of the chapel.
Yes, so we're on the far side of the wall of
yeah.
the chapel than we were before.
So that sits there. So shall we walk round to the front
let's
of the
go
building?
and have a look at the other side.
As you can see, that some of these windows, these sort of little lancet windows and things, some of them may well be won from the older buildings, but of course there was probably some sort of gate structure here,
Originally.
So some of this may be in situ. I don't honestly.
It's such a puzzle, isn't it?
It is a puzzle.
I mean,
cleverer people than me have looked at this building and have not really come out scratching their heads, really. But it's a fabulous building. And there was a point where it was after the last tenant farmers left, because this was the grandest tenant farm in Leicestershire.
Right.
It was empty for a number of years, and there were real worries that it was going to be destroyed. Because people were breaking into it, they were stealing, features from it, they were setting fires, and then luckily somebody stepped in and purchased it,
bought it. Right.
And we've had two sets of owners since then who have both been incredibly accommodating for allowing tours and other things. So but you can see clearly there's been quite a lot of work done with that sort of engineering bricks on that corner. but set into the engineering bricks is a medieval door.
It is. I was just
first floor
looking at that.
level.
It's a beautiful arched medieval doorway with like modern bricks
Yeah.
inside of it.
So, presumably there was a problem with that wall at some point, but
Yeah.
whether that is in situ, just the facing stones have been replaced around it or not, I don't
It's impossible
honestly
to say.
know. But if we walk down, we'll have a closer look at the tower, because there is one interesting feature.
Steps.
There's some steps there, I'm not sure how.
Yes. Easy as you go.
Right. So one interesting feature of this, as we get round to possibly the face of this tower, if we're coming from the street here, is we've got a coat of arms in black brick set in to the red brick. And that's a Ferrers coat of arms.
Is it? So what do we look? Because I would have just said, that's diapering, but it's clearly not.
No, it's not. I mean, we've lost the top of the coat of arms, which is another interesting thing. But you can see the diamonds in that.
Well, you can.
Yeah, that is undoubtedly the Ferrers coat of arms. So.
What a great sign to have on the side of your...
Well, if you go to Clevermoxow Castle, which is the two parishes away, built between 1480 and 1484, on the right-hand gate tower of their castle is the Hastings coat of arms in black brick.
I see. So there's a local precedent for this.
So you can imagine, you come up to the gate, which may be just over there, and you look at that and think, oh, hang on, I was looking for the Hastings.
I'm in the wrong place. That's interesting.
So we've got some, sort of standard diaper work here, but and of course this was turned into a dovecote later on.
I see. So we're standing in front of the tower, but from the opposite side now.
So we've gone around to the second side. It does have a basement as well, doesn't it? This tower.
So it's how many stories? What, a basement, 2, 1, 2, 3? What, 3 stories?
Yes.
3-story tower.
Yeah, but then we have we can have a look in.
Ooh. So Richard, the owner, is very kindly opening the door for us, so we get a chance to have a little peek inside.
Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you. Yes.
Mind the fork.
Okay.
So you can see the nesting boxes for the birds running up, and that doorway that we could see on the other side. So, and the remains of floors in here. But
gosh, that old floor right above my head. There's the most. There's just a fragment of a very old timber floor.
Yes.
Goodness me, with some straw in it.
Yes. I mean, that's just a plaster floor.
That's a plaster floor.
So as you say, the main structure straw.
When would that have been put there?
Well,
do you think?
very difficult to know, really, because you wouldn't have thought the birds would need a floor, really.
No.
So whether that may date all the way back to when this, was part of the gatehouse, but as you can see, there's a lot of modern brick, supporting this in
that,
here.
yeah.
But I mean, this is your 15th century brick on that side. And you can see what I mean by the headers and stretchers now. You see.
Oh, I see. Yeah. So you've got a row of bricks end on, and then the one above it is long ways on.
Yes.
I see.
Yeah. So that's the way they laid bricks at this period.
Aha! I've learnt that. I've learnt that for today. Headers and stretchers.
Yes.
Headers and stretchers, ladies and gentlemen.
So.
You see, it feels like that's the other tower to me, but that is, then this would have been the gateway, but you're saying not necessarily so.
Well, there is another tower.
Yeah.
It depends what Leyland means. So maybe we are starting to look at the gatehouse here, and then if there were 2 towers linked with rooms over the gate that way, they could be the 2 towers in front of the gate.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I wish you'd been a bit clearer.
Yes, I know.
Give us a plan and a couple of drawings.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Please leave us a plan. Yeah. How many times have I thought that?
We have the second tower here, and I suppose the most straightforward thing is that the gate goes between the two.
Yeah.
But that coat of arms suggests to me that you were supposed to see that as you came in. This is the Baron Ferrers and all his works. But as we move further over, you can see the good ashlar there. But look, we've got another tower here, essentially.
Yeah. Another brick tower.
And again, you can see the headers and stretchers, so that is Tudor brickwork. And then the ashlar here that sits over early brick here. So it's almost as though that has been punched in between, so I think that this dates to when the great brick gatehouse was being rationalised into Groby Old Hall. So they're turning it into something because it's no longer the family seat, which moved to Bradgate.
Yes.
But they still want a workable house, maybe a dower house or something like that.
I see. So there's still some residents on site. They're still maintaining it to a degree potentially.
Well, I think so. I mean, there's quite a lot of investment later on in this building. They're wanting it for some reason, and it was still a grey family house. So, one thing that you might want is a dower house, isn't it? So.
Interesting. So actually, that might be a nice link to where we're going to be going later on, because I think we've explored the grounds here at Groby Old Hall, and you've mentioned about the renaissance of the new grey house over at Bradgate, which we're going to go and have a look at next and continue our story, because we've got another generation of the greys coming through.
Yes, absolutely. Of course, it's a long, complicated story, but this is where it started for the Greys in Leicestershire.
Absolutely.
Certainly.
And to think that somebody like Elizabeth Woodville is such a popular character in late medieval and for Tudor history lovers as well. It's a real thrill to be here.
Yes.
Now, you did mention earlier that once a year there are tours here as part of a festival. Is that a public thing, or is that...
Yes, that's the Council for British Archaeology's Festival of Archaeology in July. So at some point in July every year we have tours around the grounds here.
That's fantastic.
Very much what we've done, although we've gone the other way round. In that we start here, because that's where people come in. So
people can once a year potentially get access and come here on site if they join that tour.
Yes, well, if Richard's happy for us to carry on coming, which is, up to this point, he has always been.
Oh, bless.
And we have never blotted our copybook so much that he has not wanted us back.
We've all got to behave. Well, it's a big thank you to Richard for letting people to be able to come here, because it's a thrill to be able to access a site like this.
That's my pleasure.
That's wonderful. So we have our journey to continue over at Bradgate. So I do want to thank the owner, Richard, who's been with us in the background today and has allowed us access to come and record here. Great gratitude from me and all of our listeners. Well, my friends, we have come a couple of miles from Groby Old Hall to Bradgate Park. Now, this is an old haunt of mine. I used to work in Leicester and spent many happy weekends here in the park, and it's so lovely to be back on such a beautiful, crisp day. And of course, I'm here with our expert who's joined me, Peter. We've come to explore the next stage of the story of the Gray family, and we are going to be joined by James. And in fact, let me introduce James. James, hello, welcome to the show. You're joining us here at Bradgate.
Hello and welcome to Bradgate Park.
Oh, thank you. Can you just introduce yourself for those people listening today?
So I'm James Dymond, I'm the director here at Bradgate, and we are the completely independent charity that manages the Bradgate Park and Swislin Wood National Nature Reserve, as we now are.
Perfect. So and you're going to be telling us more about how to visit Bradgate, perhaps, and some of the events that you've got on towards the end of our recording.
That's right. I'll give you a little bit of overview of where we are now with the ruins of Bradgate House today.
Yeah, because the story's changed, which is one of the reasons I'm really excited to be back, because I don't know, was it 5-6 years ago? I was here on a hot summer's day. I remember having ice cream outside the gate there. And you were here, Peter, or your team was here, doing archaeology, trying to figure out and make sense of the ruins that are here at Bradgate, because this was once a beautiful Tudor house, but there were lots of questions about the house. And was it the home of Lady Jane Grey? Was it here? What did the ruins, what were the dates associated with these ruins? So lots of questions were going on. I think you were at the beginning of the dig, or after year 1 or 2, I can't quite remember, but I distinctly remember saying, I really want to come back. I really want to come back and find the end of the story, and you're going to tell us the end of the story here today.
Where we are so far, at least, yeah.
But before we do that, we need to pick up the story of the Gray family.
Right. So
tell us about that.
Well, we left the first Marquis of Dorset, Thomas Gray, at Groby, building his great big gatehouse there and towers, and trying to make sense of what John Leyland said about it. But John Leyland also came here, and he just describes this as a fair park and lodge. Now he spends a lot more time talking about the water lead that runs for a long way across the park, looks as though it runs uphill but doesn't in fact, to drive a watermill at the far end. And the word for the house is just one word: lodge. Yeah. If he had seen the great brick mansion that we're standing in the middle of the ruins of, he would have mentioned it. You would not in 1540 have ignored a great brick pile like this. So we are fairly convinced that this did not exist at the time of the 1540s, probably. And when you look into it, the second Marquis, we know, was building a lodge. And when he dies, in his will, he asks his executors to finish building it according to the plat thereof, the plans that were laid out. And I think we are standing on the second Marquis's lodge here.
Okay, so we need to just kind of give folk who are listening a kind of a feel for where we are. So Bradgate Park is a huge hunting park, or it was a hunting park, and it's still a beautiful park.
It was created in about 1241. It then massively expanded in 1500 by the first Marquis, and which then takes it to its present extent, in fact bigger than its present extent, because we've lost bits to the reservoir and all sorts of things. Right. We've excavated the lodge of the original park 100 yards or so away in that direction, but we can't find anything on that site that goes much further than 1400, pushing it as hard as we possibly can.
Okay, so we do have a medieval lodge about 100 yards away from here. And now...
But the conventional wisdom is that this brick house was built between 1500 and 1520, and we have been sceptical of that, shall we say. And so the excavation really was to see if we could put a date to it. We knew that there were foundations, you can see them still sticking out the grass here, of a building in what is between the two wings of the house. The ruined house essentially has a main range here with the great hall in it, and parlours and possibly servants' halls on that side. And then two wings coming forward. On one side, the service wings with the great kitchen and the bakehouse, and then on the other side, the chapel and the private rooms of the Gray family.
So we've got a single courtyard with like a U-shape arrangement
Absolutely right,
around them. But we're standing right in the middle of that courtyard, and literally you're pointing beneath our feet, and we can see bits of stone protruding out.
Now, the reason that they stick out is that when this was given, Bradgate Park was bought from the Gray family and given to the people of Leicester and Leicestershire in 1928. After that, the new owners, to try and tidy everything up, took away about a metre of soil from the inside of this. They recovered the Tudor bricks that they found here and used them to build the walls that we see around the outside. Some of these are old, a lot of them are 1930-ish, including the polygonal tower at the corner there. It's on a Tudor base, but the superstructure is about 1930.
Okay.
So, which really alarmed us when we realised that. We thought, how much of the rest of this is actually built in 1930? But we've got photographs of this from 1900. So we know all the rest of this is fine.
And when you say this, can we just give folk who are tuning in a little bit more idea of what is here and what we can actually see?
Yeah. So, the Great Hall here, it's got an oriel window, a bay window at the lighting the dais at this end, just as at Groby they had one there. Here, the floor of the Great Hall is raised above a cellar. So, we could never excavate the floor of the Great Hall, long since disappeared into the cellar. But great big windows. There's a porch there, probably added in 1600-ish to the Great Hall. And then on the one side, we've got the great big cooking fireplace there. That we can
huge fireplace, isn't it? Enormous.
And there was a second one in this end wall of it as well. So it had, it was a party house. I mean, this was built for entertaining.
I see, right.
So and then beyond that was the bakehouse, and presumably in amongst this is a brew house as well, I'm sure. So
all the service buildings, as you say, on one side, and then over here, this is the most complete building.
Well, this is the chapel. So it's the only building that in the 18th century, when the house went out of use, and we've got a Kidder plan from 1746, which shows the house apparently completely intact. And then from about 1790, we have drawings of this as a ruin, looking very much like it does now, apart from there was a big gable end there that collapsed in about 1895 in the Great Gale.
Right.
But the chapel, they put a new roof on it in the 18th century, and that has preserved that building much better than anywhere else, really.
Yeah, right. So now we've got a feel for where we are. We were talking about the fact that I think you were suggesting that there's a building beneath our feet here in the central courtyard.
There is a building here, and it's a stone footings of a building, and it's always looked like an anomaly. Now, it was either going to be very early or very late. Yeah, it didn't fit in with the plan of the house, so it could have been something that had just dropped in here, particularly when the main entrance perhaps is turned around to that side, coming in through that porch over there. But the other possibility is that it was early, and that's what it turned out to be. So this is a stone-footed building, and we are fairly convinced this is the second Marquess's lodge.
And this is the lodge Leyland saw and commented on, not the house
Yes.
that we see around
Well,
us.
that's my interpretation of what
Okay.
we're seeing here. I mean, none of this is fact. This is all interpretation. So we found the stone wall runs back, and so it's quite a big, right almost to that wall there. So it's a great big building.
Okay.
We've got wall on this side, wall on that side, wall on the third side. Fourth side's a bit scrubby, to be honest, in terms of walls. There are walls there. And at that end of the building, there is a stone floor. This end of the building, it's a red clay floor. And you can see the partition between the two ends of it.
So there was, two different
rooms in
obviously,
this, on the ground floor. But what we found later on, as we started expanding the excavations, and we were, unlike Groby, where the 3 days with time team, we were here for 5 years, for 7 weeks every summer, university training excavation, Leicester University. We then found that this end wall actually runs all the way through there as far as we have looked. And then there is a wall turning off that way as well.
To the right there, towards the Great Hall.
But we're now feeling that this wall here, which always looked a bit scrubby, the fourth wall of the building, is probably an internal wall, and this building just runs back.
So a much bigger building, perhaps than you originally thought it was.
Yes, absolutely. We've still got work to do on the material from the excavation, so the story isn't finally completed, but one of the crucial things is from the clay floor that we are indeed standing just above, sort of trodden into the surface of that clay floor was a coin of Henry VIII, old fat Henry VIII from the 1540s, suggesting that this building was still in use in the 1540s.
So that blows out this idea
that it was built between...
that the red brick building that we see today was built earlier than that.
So this is the second Marquis's building, we think. But it then, on this side of it, we got complexity. So alongside that wall, we found what we technically call a sticky out bit there that we think is probably a chimney base, but no hearth at this level. So the suggestion is that the hearth is up above. So this is a two-storey building at least.
Yeah.
We then found a guardrobe shaft, and we found a stair turret. And then butted up to that, which is butted up to the original building, we found brick walls running off it. And alongside this, we found a cooking hearth. So we found a kitchen, basically. Bread ovens either side, big hearth, not quite the scale of that, but pretty big.
Yeah.
And a pit a little bit further over, absolutely crammed full of pottery. When we get the date of that pottery, and we still haven't pinned that down entirely, that may well be where they're clearing that kitchen, because it's all being demolished.
Right. Fascinating.
And that included sort of Netherlandish painted pottery, so imported stuff, which we might be able to pin down a date for, I'm not sure. But, but then further over here, quite a long way away from this.
Yes, quite a long way from the lodge, so you're pointing quite at a distance.
We walked through as we came through a building there with stone walls, you may have noticed. Everything else is brick, and that block running that way is stone. And shall we just walk?
Yes, let's go and have a look at that. So while we're walking, we've got this lodge, but the second Marquis is by this time thinking, actually, I need something much bigger and much grander.
I think it's the third Marquis who's going for the big stuff. In the second Marquis may well be doing the extensions, but that may be the third Marquis. But you can see here, we've just walked past the chapel.
Yeah, so the chapel's behind us now. We're walking away from
this
it.
Building with stone walls running through. But look here, under our feet.
Yes, stones.
Yeah, of a wall. And we found the walls of this building running under the big brick house foundations, and then turning and going back again that way. So they've cut the end off at that building when they built the big brick house.
So there was an earlier building here, a long range here, that's been built across.
The newer house is built across it. So that is early phases. So this is probably the second Marquis as well. So that is part of a big complex, because...
what do you think this was? Any ideas?
No, not really. It's always described as sort of guest lodgings on the plans, but we really don't know. But you can see it came down here. We then got another one of these sticky out bits here, which looked like chimney base again.
Right.
But so maybe this is two-storey originally. And then on this side, we got a cellar with a brick floor at the bottom. And a wall running off that way. Wherever you're looking, this was running off the excavations we've got into the distance. And we can't follow it very much further because, of course, we've got the cellar of the later building there.
Of the Great Hall,
But, it's just so much more complex than we imagined that lodge would be.
I think that's the takeaway, isn't it, for people who are listening, is that there was a substantial lodge here. It was quite complex. Maybe the second Marquess added to that.
Yes.
But that was still not sufficient.
So the third Marquis, who became the Duke of Suffolk, is probably expanding what he's got and then thinks, no, I want something much grander than this. I'm a Duke now.
So maybe we could just talk about the history of that.
Yes.
Who was the third Duke and how did he become that Duke?
The third Marquis of Dorset is another Thomas Grey, because they all are. And he marries Frances Brandon, who is the daughter of Charles Brandon, who's Duke of Suffolk, Henry VIII's best mate.
Bosom buddy.
But Frances Brandon's mother was Henry VIII's sister.
Mary.
Yes. So they're having got close to the royal family with Elizabeth Woodville. They're again back into the
right at the heart,
close relationship with the family, and so as the number of Tudor heirs gets less and less, of course, then that Brandon line becomes the possible claimants to the throne.
And of course, then we have Charles Brandon having the two sons, who tragically die within hours of each other.
I hadn't realised it was that close, but yes.
Of the sweating sickness. I think it's the only record. I think it's the shortest time between one heir and the other.
Yes.
So we have I think the elder one dies first, and his younger brother becomes the Duke of Suffolk for literally hours before he also dies. So
the title then passes by right of his wife to Henry Grey, the third Marquis.
And Henry Grey, of course, and Frances are, of course, mother and father to Lady Jane Grey.
Or Queen Jane, as we like to prefer.
Queen Jane, well, there's a good point of debate. Should she be
only Leicestershire Queen? Yes,
well, there are many people who would agree with you. But... when do you think this red brick
Well,
Tudor house was
well,
built?
we're thinking that the lodge is not demolished until into the 1540s because we got that coin off the floor. So we're thinking that possibly the Great Brick House is built around elements of the earlier lodge, so that can still be in use while they are building. That makes sense to me. I mean, so I think it's in the 1540s that the Great Brick House is built, and we've now got some dendrodates from above the present ceiling of the chapel there that suggests that the timbers up there were cut to the trees from which they're produced, cut down between 1540 and 1560-ish. But of course the building cannot have been built after the early 1550s because Henry Grey and Queen Jane are executed in 1550.
And of course Leyland has stated, hasn't he, already, that it was built by...
he's talking about a lodge being built by the second Marquis.
Right.
But this is, of course, the next generation. This is the third Marquis. So, but he would have mentioned it if this had been built earlier. But
that's it. That's what I meant. Yeah.
So we've got the 1540s for the lodge, and after 1540 for the chapel. So, and it's a very tight time frame that this must be mid to late 1540s that this building goes up. But of course, how long does it take you to build something like this? Put enough people on it and you can do it pretty quickly.
How long do you think?
Well, Kirby Muxloe Castle, for instance, we know that they started work in October 1480, but that was with the earthworks. They were putting moats and gardens and things. And they have finished the building that they do because they never quite finish it. December 1484. So they've got 1481, 1482, 1483 are the main building things. So 3 years.
3 years to build a castle. Faster than some work gets done these days.
Yeah. So as I say, you put enough people onto it, and you can do it fairly quickly. I think.
Yeah, right.
So
okay. So can you describe? What do we know of what the finished house looked like? If we'd have been riding, I should say, through the park back in the 1550s, what would have greeted us?
Well, it would have been a prodigy house. It would have been a really, sort of striking, modern, building, fit for a duke, really. We've got one image of it as a living house, which was Leonard Niff in 1700-ish, which was taken from further up in the park, looking
down onto the house.
Onto it, and it's a grand old pile, really.
Yes, because there's some beautiful. Was this where the garden was? Just over to my right. Was it? Would it have been a walled garden?
It's got a terrace walkway around the outside of it, parterres in the inside. So you'd be able to see the decorative planting, and at the corner of the house, there you've got a stair turret that goes up high enough to be a prospect tower. So you can stand on the top of that and look at the lovely plantings in the garden. So
I think this is always such a glorious... It fills my imagination, this part of the house. But because we have the beautiful gardens there, I take it this probably was still the Privy Range, this where the most important lodgings would have been, looking down onto the garden.
Yeah. So I mean, the main private rooms, we're probably in a parlour off the end of the Great Hall here. Then you'd have the private rooms of the family on the first floor of this range here, you would imagine.
Yeah.
So,
did it have a long gallery? Do we know?
I don't think we have any documents that describe the rooms, so...
We don't know. We don't really know how the rooms were arranged.
We can see the ground floor plan, but what was happening up above is really we don't know enough to be able to really reconstruct it.
So let me come on to the tricky subject of Lady Jane Grey.
Right.
Oh, Queen Jane, since I'm in Leicestershire.
Was she born here? So many people say that she was, but at the very beginning of this podcast, when I mentioned that, you smiled wryly and sort of say, "Oh, I'm not sure." So
I think it's unlikely, personally. I think she was more likely born in London, but I don't think anybody says, and there's no.
Why do you think that?
Well, firstly, I'm not sure how much they were at Bradgate all the time here, but being close to the court, of course, they would spend a lot of their time in London. I mean, it's not impossible that she was born here, but it's just probably unlikely, I think.
And where has that come from? This Jane was born at Bradgate. Do you know?
It's one of those things that people have said for a long time. I mean, we know she was here. I mean, we when people visited Roger Ascham, visited in 1548, 1547, that sort of time. He finds her in the house, doing her Renaissance princess stuff, reading Greek and Latin and things.
Do you think she might have been in this room?
Well, I'm sure she will have been in this room at some point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Newly built house. Absolutely brand new. The woodwork still smelling a bit green, and but she was here, I'm sure. And of course, Bess of Hardwick is said he was married in the chapel here in 1548, possibly 1547, that sort of time. Whether that chapel or whether it's an early chapel, I suspect it. Newly built again. Come and use our brand new chapel, Bess.
Yeah, we're going to go into the chapel in a minute, but perhaps we could just touch back on that story of Roger Ascham, because it's quite, it's one of those legends, isn't it? The legend of Bradgate Park, almost.
Yeah, when he arrived, to visit the family, everybody was in the park hunting, apart from Jane, who was studying, doing her diligent princess bit, ready to rule the country if necessary, although, in the hope that Edward would last forever, but, of course he didn't. So...
Yes, now, and Bess, of course, is another formidable character from the Tudor period, but I can't quite remember, so I will definitely do some research on this, why she was here.
I can't remember either. It's we look at James.
Well, James is not the expert on this, but I seem to recall, was there not some relationship between Bess and Jane's tutor or family tutor or something like that, which meant there was a relationship between them?
That could well be it. I really can't remember. So,
so folks, we are going to do our homework. I'm going to do my homework when I get home. I too have a vague memory of some connection with somebody in the household, and that's why she's here. I just can't remember who it is. But shall we go in the chapel? Because as I said, that...
I mean, one of the major problems that we've got here is not only did they strip a metre off this, they then rebuilt the walls on top of the walls that were here. So a lot of some of the brickwork we see is modern, some of it is Tudor, and it's a matter of spotting the difference.
So give us a masterclass again in.
So we're looking for that English bond, the headers and stretchers.
So let me find some. Is it all over here? Well, that's one, isn't it? That's the end of that one, but that's long. Is that right? No?
Yeah, as I say, bits of the wall seem to be quite genuine. Yeah, that's headers and stretchers, whereas there, not so much, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, so so they've both sort of consolidated what they found, but they've then used the Tudor brick they're finding from the rubble to rebuild.
Yeah.
So, which is unhelpful.
Yes, because a lot of the ruins are just neatly at the same
all
height.
the same height. And that's partly because they've taken a metre off. And this would be the ground level before. We wouldn't have been able to stand on the ground we're standing at the moment. We would have been up at this height.
Really? So we're actually almost at the... We would have been...
The best part of that, I think. There might have been something sticking out the top. But I wish they hadn't. But... no point in that, really. There is
It does make it more complicated, doesn't it, for the visitor who's trying to reimagine what it was like.
Yes.
If you don't know these things, it can be very misleading.
It's probably worth saying, just to give you an idea of scale, if you look back across to the parterre garden, the terrace around the edge, you can see where the material is mounded up, and that is likely to be, based on some recent archaeological digs, a lot of the tidying up, as we put it, from within here. So they didn't bury it very far. Which also wasn't very helpful in terms of what it's doing to the walls today.
Unfortunately, it wasn't an archaeological dig; it was a clearance. We've never found any plans that they drew up at the time, any photographs of the work being done, which would have been really, really helpful. Whereas Abbey Park in Leicester, which was being excavated cleared at exactly the same time, at least there are newspaper cuttings, there are architects' drawings of what they found. We've found nothing yet for this, although I live in hope that one day we will find a cache of photographs and papers and things which will really sort of move us on with our understanding of what they were doing, because they seem to have been very quiet about it. I've seen some letters that just talk of, very generally to, the ministry, that, they're doing some tidying up work and, sorting the boundaries out and things, but it was an awful lot more than that.
The chapel. So we have the marriage of Bess. I wonder which marriage it is. I'm sure there are listeners here who are going, of course, Sarah, it's so-and-so. You should know this. So that's rather glorious. Of course, Jane would have worshipped in here, I would imagine.
Yes.
Of course.
Yes, I think so. We've now gone into the rather echoey chapel, but we've got Greys in residence, you can see.
There's a beautiful tomb here. What a marvellous tomb. Who is it?
Henry and Anne Grey from the early 17th century. So these are the people who came back to Bradgate, because Bradgate, once the Duke and Jane had been executed, were traitors. Their lands are seized by the Crown, so they don't actually get it back fully until Elizabeth is dead.
Oh, really?
Because Elizabeth bore grudges, and Jane, trying to take the throne ahead of Mary, also cut out Elizabeth from the succession, and she never forgave them. Within weeks of Elizabeth dying and James coming to the throne, Henry Grey was Baron Grey of Groby again. Right. They get no title with Elizabeth. They don't get the title to Bradgate back until Elizabeth has died. It's rented back to them, so they're having to pay rent for their own house.
I was going to ask you what happened to the house then during that period. So it was still being cared for, but they were rented or as tenants.
I think from the 1560s there's some documentation that the surviving Grey, who's Sir John Grey of Pergo in Essex, gets to rent his family house. But there is a fabulous document from the Court of Augmentation, which of course was Cromwell's office for dealing with land seized from monasteries. But of course this is land seized, so it goes into the Court of Augmentations to actually deal with it from a bureaucratic point of view. And there's a document from the 1570s that says the house of Bradgate is in good repair because they still are responsible for the buildings, apart from the floor of the Great Hall, which is collapsed but by dint of the fact that the joists weren't strong enough.
Right.
But it does say in terms that the great big house was built by the Duke of Suffolk. So, we have an almost contemporary account that it was him that built it, because we did wonder to start with whether it was him, whether it was Henry Grey from the early 17th century when they came back to the family that they then rebuilt.
Yeah.
But we're now absolutely sure that it was actually the earlier Henry Grey, the Duke of Suffolk, third Marquis.
That's really the big story here, isn't it? That you have finally managed at least to solve kind of the sequence of events of the buildings that were built here, and the fact that this house that we see, the ruins, was built by Jane's father, and Jane would have known this house.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, which we were doubtful about, but yeah.
It was sorted.
Thankfully for the trust.
Should give you a round of applause there. Well done. Excellent. Good. So what becomes of the house? Why is it in ruins now?
The family, the Greys, had more than one house, because you accumulate houses if you're a big family. And they had Enville Hall, they had Dymond Massey, and the one that they decided to let go was Bradgate. So, in the 1740s, they brick up the windows because they have these other houses and they don't feel the need for Bradgate. I think one branch of the family dies out who probably had greater links here. Enville becomes the major seat. And while it looks in good nick in 1746, and we have this plan with a little sketch of it on there, by the end of the 18th century, it's a ruin. And it looks very much like it does now, apart from the great gable that collapsed in 1895. It looks almost identical, and it's a very rapid demise of the house. So whether it's actually demolished, whether they just, once you stop looking after the roofs of buildings, they will go into decay very quickly. But we've got some very good drawings from the about 1790 showing it very much like it is now.
So from your 5 years of digging, you've answered some big questions, but you also said there's lots of finds to go through. So clearly that's one of your tasks coming up that may also further inform the picture. Is there anything specific you're hoping to find from that? And do you have any other kind of post-dig processing that you still need to do?
So far we have published the lodge, the earlier building. We've published the stable block, which sits on the other side of the river over there. Because what we see now, it was a very big curtilage, this house, that ran for hundreds of metres, certainly in that direction, across the river. So we published the stables as well. So the big one to do is the house, and it's now we're just looking at how we can do that. But Richard Thomas, who was the director of the excavations,
when I was here,
we are talking at the moment about how we can do that, and and where we can get the funding for some of the work on the material, because one of the things about student training excavations is they will fund the digging, but not so much the post-excavation work. So we need to find some money from somewhere to make it all happen. But I'm fairly confident Richard is a very, very efficient person, and I reckon within the next couple of years we will get that sorted.
Wonderful. Well, it's been a brilliant project. I'm so honoured to have been here a few years ago and to be able to come back and hear the end of the story, because I was very intrigued. In fact, I think when I was here, you had a completely different idea of what was going on. So it's amazing how it evolves, and
Yes.
Those 5 years were very
And we've come
worth
back to where we started, probably, but not quite the conventional view. This wasn't built between 1500 and 1520, but still Lady Jane Grey is in the story, which is good.
No, it's very good. And on that note, of course, that is one reason why, if you love Tudor history, you will definitely want to visit Bradgate Park to see the ruins and to let your imagination run wild and imagine Jane spending time here, apart from the fact that it is actually a very beautiful park. And this is where I turn to James, who's going to tell us about visiting Bradgate and what plans you might have for visitors and how they can make most of the facilities that you have here.
Yeah, that's right. So, I mean, as you've hinted at, the Queen Jane story is a real hook for people to come to Bradgate. They love immersing themselves in this environment and, like you say, imagining that story. So we open the ruins from sort of Easter through to October half term every year. We're very lucky to have a really dedicated team of volunteers here, and it's thanks to them that there are 3 days a week, so every weekend and on a Thursday. The ruins are open, completely free to come and enter once the park's free to enter as well, but free to come into the ruins. And people can either wander around at leisure, or they can absorb themselves even more in that history with a wonderful volunteer tour guide who will show them around and talk to them. And that story we've now talked about earlier about those dates and that it was Queen Jane's home in her childhood has really reassured our volunteers. There was a real period of uncertainty there where they worried that all the story they'd been telling for years and years wasn't quite true. But the fact that we've come full circle is great, and they will really give people the full nuts and bolts story if you want it. And come and see what there is. So the Trust is working now to do a lot of much needed improvements and conservation work to the ruins, including the chapel that we're stood in. We're looking at how we interpret the site better. We've just finished a user survey which has given us some great intel on what people would like to see and learn from their visit here, and how you might experience that differently in the future, including the way you come in, for example. But also to look at what repairs are needed. It might be a ruin, but we don't want it to be too much more ruinous, clearly. And the chapel itself, there's a number of issues with the ceiling in here. It clearly needs some improvements to the decor. It's quite a tired building, given its age. Stonework and the monument itself needs some TLC. So thanks to some local funding, we've got works to do this financial year over the next few months to this building itself, and then we hope to follow that on with a major conservation and repair programme to the wider complex of ruins outside, which is really exciting. So a lot of survey work over the last year or so, a lot of information from experts that's really expanded our knowledge even further into some real niche areas, some archaeological digs, some drilling through walls to see how thick they are and whether they're going to stand up for many hundreds of years more. So, exciting times, but we're just at the start of that journey of really seeing what we need to do next.
Do I have to come back again and
you will, yes.
and see the next phase as it unfolds?
Keep coming back.
Coming back. I absolutely will. Because actually, I've got a big soft spot for Leicester, because as I said, I did spend time here. And there's a lot to see in Leicester. You've got beautiful Bradgate Park, and then, of course, you've got Richard III and the cathedral and Bosworth, and of course you've got a couple of lovely castles as well.
Yes.
Not directly Tudor, but significant for the Wars of the Roses.
Yes, and of course the Hastings family runs on through the Tudor period.
And so those castles are Kirby Muxloe
and Ashby, yes.
And Ashby. So actually, in a relatively well-confined, easily managed area, you've got lots of wonderful history to immerse yourself in.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, I think with that, we're going to draw our podcast to a close. So I just want to thank Peter and thank James for joining us here at Bradgate today. Huge appreciation from me and from our listeners. And I just want to thank you, dear listeners, for tuning in and hopefully enjoying another episode of the Tudor History and Travel Show. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode of the Tudor History and Travel Show. If you've loved the show, please take a moment to subscribe, like, and rate this podcast so that we can spread the Tudor love. Until next time, my friends, all that remains for me to say is
Happy time travelling!